I am Eleanor Graves, 71 years old, retired from a lifetime of teaching and shaping young minds. Tonight I was supposed to look like the proud mother of the groom. Instead, I found myself smoothing the hem of my navy dress with trembling hands, wondering if dignity alone could hold me together. I had taken $25,000 from my retirement fund, quietly, deliberately believing that investing in my son's wedding was investing in his future happiness. The rehearsal dinner glowed with candlelight inside a renovated greenhouse. Guests laughed easily, clinking glasses over courses I had helped pay for. I searched for my name on the family seating chart, expecting it beneath Daniel's, my boy, the child I had raised since he was 2. But my eyes stalled. The family table belonged to the Ellisons Claire's family, his fiancée. Daniel's name nestled right beside hers. His in-laws surrounded him like a protective wall. My name was nowhere. A waiter guided me to table 12, tucked behind a potted fern. Strangers from Claire's side shook my hand politely, as if I were no more important than the sound technician at the back. I forced a smile, but the room felt tilted. I folded the cloth napkin into smaller and smaller squares, my fingertips stiff with restraint. Then Daniel stood handsome in his dark suit, voice steady. He lifted his glass high. To the woman who has been like a true mother to me, always wise, always warm. His eyes found Margot Ellison. The applause thundered, people rising to toast her while my chest hollowed. A woman nearby whispered too loudly. But isn't that his real mom sitting back there? I did not move. I did not cry. I simply sat very still, as though silence might cloak me from further humiliation. In that moment, I felt something fracture, not with noise, but with a quiet finality. I understood that I had been erased from the story I thought I had written. And as the music swelled for the first dance, I knew I could no longer pretend to belong. The night after the dinner, I couldn't sleep. My mind circled back not to the glow of chandeliers or the sting of that toast, but to the first night Daniel came into my arms. He was only 2 cheeks blotchy from crying, clutching a worn, stuffed rabbit. My sister had been lost in that wreck on Highway 9, and in a single meeting with a social worker, my life changed forever. She handed me a folder and a trembling toddler, and just like that, I was no longer simply Eleanor. I became someone's mother. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed that night, listening to the tiny sound of his breathing through the baby monitor. A letter from my fiancé rested unopened on the dresser. We had been planning a wedding of our own, a different life entirely. Instead, I drafted a resignation to the superintendent. I gave up the promotion that would have taken me to a larger district, more money, more recognition. I chose the smaller school, the shorter commute, because Daniel needed stability more than I needed ambition. There were years of asthma flares when I would wake before he even called my name, rushing with the inhaler already in hand. Mornings when I wrote encouraging notes on scraps of paper and tucked them inside his lunchbox. Afternoons spent at track meets screaming myself hoarse as he ran across the finish line, his arms raised in triumph. At graduation, he hugged me so tightly that I thought my ribs would crack and whispered, "You're my whole world, Mom." Those words had once been my anchor. But lying in bed now, staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly above me, I wondered how that boy had grown into the man who looked past me as though I were invisible. When Daniel brought Claire home for the first time, I tried to convince myself she was simply nervous, that the stiffness in her smile was shyness and nothing more. She set her designer purse carefully on the chair, glanced around my modest kitchen, and complimented my casserole as though she were being polite to a stranger at a potluck. Her mother, Margot, followed soon after, every inch of her polished, her nails gleaming, her pearls precise. She shook my hand firmly, but her eyes slid across me like I was a piece of furniture, necessary but unremarkable. They invited me to a brunch a month later at their sprawling home lined with tall windows and white marble counters. I wore my best blazer and pinned on the brooch Richard had given me years ago. Margot leaned close, smiled thinly, and said, "You must be so proud of how far Daniel has come." It was not the words themselves that pierced me, but the undertone, as though she were reminding me he had risen above the soil I had raised him in. I laughed politely, hiding the sting, and folded my napkin with deliberate care. Over the months, I noticed the changes. Our dinners once every Sunday shifted to once a month, then to holidays only. His calls grew shorter, rushed. When I asked how he was sleeping, or if he was still running in the mornings, he answered with vague phrases, his eyes drifting toward Claire, as though my questions belonged to a world he had already left behind. One evening, when I pressed him gently, Daniel said, with an awkward laugh, "Mom, it's just... Claire's family understands the world I live in now." The words landed heavy like a door slowly closing between us. The night after the wedding sleep would not come. The laughter from the reception still echoed in my ears, blending with the memory of Daniel's champagne glass lifted toward another woman. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, the shadows spinning slowly around the room. At last, I rose, wrapped my robe around my shoulders, and padded down the hallway to Richard's old cabinet. Richard had always been meticulous, a man who believed every paper deserved its own label. After his stroke, he had organized everything with neat tabs and locked drawers. He had given me the key a year before he died, pressing it into my palm with quiet gravity. "You'll know when to use it," he'd said. I had never touched it until that night. Inside the drawer beneath tax folders and property records, I found a slim brown envelope. My name was written across the front in Richard's careful block letters. With trembling fingers, I opened it. Documents spilled across the desk, thick with signatures and seals. A trust established years ago, quietly nurtured through municipal bonds and property shares. The numbers startled me, more than $800,000, but it was not the amount that made my hands shake. It was the clause written in Richard's deliberate style. "The distribution of this trust shall remain at the sole discretion of Eleanor Graves, provided that the beneficiary, Daniel Graves, maintains meaningful personal and moral contact with her." I sat back in the chair, my breath caught. Richard had anticipated this possibility. He had left me both the responsibility and the power. It was not spite, it was a safeguard. The choice was mine and mine alone. That night, as the house creaked with silence, I realized I was no longer powerless. I could decide what story my sacrifices would ultimately tell. The following morning, the air in my house felt heavier, as though the walls themselves were waiting for me to act. I tucked the trust papers into my bag and drove downtown to a narrow brick building where Harriet Doyle kept her practice. Harriet had been our attorney for years, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper memory. She welcomed me with a hug that smelled faintly of lavender and coffee. "I was wondering when you'd come by," she said, as though she had been expecting me all along. We sat across from each other at her worn oak desk, sunlight slanting through the blinds onto the scattered folders. I slid the documents toward her, my hands steady despite the storm inside me. Harriet read carefully, adjusting her glasses, her brow furrowing in concentration. At last she looked up. "It's a discretionary trust. Richard wrote this with precision. You have full authority. You can continue with Daniel, or you can remove him entirely and appoint someone else." Her words settled into me like stones in a river sinking deep. I thought of the boy who had once clung to my hand during spelling bees, and the man who had raised his glass to another woman as his mother. My throat tightened, but my decision was clear. "There's someone else," I said. "Her name is Maya Ortiz." Maya had been in my senior English class a decade ago, a girl with a quick mind who hid behind her hoodie in the back row. Her mother had disappeared, her father gone, leaving her to shuffle between foster homes. I remembered the day I found her asleep in the library with all her belongings crammed into one backpack. We had kept in touch quietly over the years. Now she ran a small program for young mothers trying to finish school. That evening at my desk, I filled out the beneficiary form. My pen did not hesitate. The ink dried quickly, final and absolute. It was barely a week later when I heard the knock at my door. 3 sharp raps followed by a pause, the rhythm Daniel had used since he was a boy. I opened it to find him standing on the porch, shirt untucked, eyes darting nervously. Claire hovered just behind, arms folded across her silk blouse, her jaw tight with impatience. "Mom, we need to talk," Daniel said quickly. His voice carried a strain that reminded me of the child he once was, desperate for reassurance. I stepped aside and let them in. They sat on the edge of the sofa like visitors rather than family. Our mortgage pre-approval was denied. Daniel began, elbows pressed to his knees. They said the guarantor was removed. "That was you." His eyes searched mine. "You withdrew." "I did," I answered. My tone was calm, steady. Claire leaned forward, her voice sharp. "You told us you'd help us start our life together. You promised." I met her gaze evenly. "I did help. I paid for your wedding, every flower, every glass, every plate. But this," I gestured to the space between us. "This is different." Daniel's face fell. "So that's it?" I drew a breath, steadying myself. I've chosen to invest in something else, something that reflects who I am now, where I see true value. Claire's eyes narrowed. "This is about that toast, isn't it?" Daniel didn't mean anything by it. "It's not about one toast," I said gently. "It's about years of fading, of being erased. I can't fund a story that no longer sees me in it." Daniel leaned back, stunned, his lips parting, but no words forming. For the first time, the silence between us felt heavier than any argument. Within 2 weeks, whispers began to circle back to me, carried on the voices of old friends who never strayed far from the town's gossip. Lorraine called from the salon where she still had her hair colored every other Tuesday. "You'll never guess who was asking about you," she said, her tone half amusement, half disbelief. "Margot Ellison, poking around like a hen in a locked pantry. Word is, you bought a condo overlooking the coast, paid in full." I smiled into the phone. It was true. A modest 2-bedroom on the bluff, nothing extravagant except for the view. I had wired the payment through the same investment firm Richard once trusted. No mortgage, no explanations. Just a quiet choice that left others buzzing with speculation. They all want to know how a retired school teacher managed that, Lorraine continued. I told them maybe you had a secret book deal. Her laughter bubbled through the receiver, and for the first time in weeks I laughed too. Soon after, the messages from Claire began. Little check-ins, invitations to brunch, voice notes pretending nothing had changed. "Just thinking of you. We should catch up. Maybe tea like old times." Each one felt rehearsed too smooth, like wrapping paper hiding an empty box. I did not respond, not out of cruelty, but because there was nothing left to answer. Silence can be heavier than words, and mine had begun to carry weight. Each morning I stood on the balcony of my new home, the ocean stretching wide and restless before me. The gulls cried overhead, the air sharp with salt. For the first time in years, I felt space around me, room to breathe, to decide what mattered, without waiting for anyone else to notice. One afternoon, an email arrived with the subject line, "Look what we did." I opened it to find a photograph of Maya standing in front of a cheerful white building, trimmed in bright blue. A ribbon stretched across the doorway, scissors poised in her hand. Above her head hung a sign that read, "The Graves Ortiz Foundation." She had written in the body of the email, "We have 8 beds, a community kitchen, and 2 full-time counselors, all because of you." I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. The ache inside me shifted, replaced by something steadier, brighter. This, I thought, this is legacy. Weeks later, the gala was held in the restored music conservatory, its vaulted ceilings strung with warm lights. Waiters glided through the crowd with trays of lemon tartlets and sparkling water. The air hummed with quiet excitement. I wore navy, again simple and familiar. When Maya took the podium, her voice was strong but trembling with emotion. "This foundation exists because someone believed in me long before I believed in myself. She gave when no one was watching. Tonight I want to honor the woman who made all of this possible, Eleanor Graves, our seed investor of hope." Applause rose like a wave, filling the cavernous room. My knees wavered as I stood, but my steps were sure. At the stage, I adjusted the microphone and let the silence settle. This foundation honors women who raise children not of their body but of their heart. Women who gave completely and were forgotten once the spotlight shifted. Here we remember. As I stepped down, I caught sight of Daniel and Claire standing near the back doors, their names absent from the guest list. Claire's mouth moved sharply toward him, but Daniel's eyes met mine wide and stricken. I walked past them without pause, the applause swelling behind me. The envelope arrived in late October, tucked among utility bills and grocery flyers. I knew the handwriting before I even opened it, round and deliberate, the same script Daniel used on his science fair boards when he was 11. My hands trembled as I slit the paper, carefully unfolding the thick stationery. It began with my name. Not Mom, not Mother, just Eleanor. He wrote that he had been wrong, that in chasing the life Claire wanted cocktail parties, curated photographs, an image of success. He had let himself believe my world was outdated, small, unnecessary. He admitted that he had turned away from the quiet sacrifices that had built him, and he was sorry. "You didn't give me life," he wrote, "but you gave me living, and I never stopped to honor that." There was no mention of the trust, no plea for money, only the final line. "Can we talk?" I read it once quickly, then again, slowly and finally, with my eyes closed between sentences, hearing the voice of the little boy who used to climb into my bed after a nightmare, clutching his rabbit, whispering he was safe because I was there. For a moment, I wanted to forgive, to open the door, and pretend the fracture could be mended with ink on paper. But wounds of the heart are not stitched so easily. Some require more than apology. They require recognition that comes too late. I slipped the letter into my journal between hymns and pressed flowers and tore out a clean page. My pen moved steadily. "You pointed to another woman and called her your true mother. I only followed your lead." The next morning, I sealed it, dropped it in the postbox, and walked away without looking back. A year slipped quietly past each season, layering itself over the last, until the night of that rehearsal dinner felt like a distant photograph. I lived now in the condo on the bluff, the sea spread wide before me, its tides marking my days more faithfully than any calendar. Most mornings, I walked to the community center where Maya ran her program. I tutored girls who had fallen behind in algebra or helped them shape essays for scholarships they were too shy to believe they deserved. Their laughter filled the rooms quick and unpolished, and each time one of them looked at me with sudden understanding, I felt a piece of myself restored. On Sundays, Maya often invited me to join her and her daughter at the corner cafe. The little girl would slide into the booth beside me, tug at my sleeve, and call me Gran, as though it had always been my name. I never asked for it. She gave it freely, and I let it settle into the quiet spaces of my heart where old wounds had once lived. From friends, I heard that Daniel's startup had folded in the spring. Claire was spotted alone at a charity brunch, her smile brittle, her hand conspicuously bare. Rumors said they were living separately, but I did not ask. Some doors once closed no longer invite knocking. Instead, I poured my time into the foundation, into the students who sat across from me, with eyes that slowly brightened under belief. This was a family of another kind, stitched together not by blood, but by choice and recognition. It was enough. This morning, I stood on the balcony as the tide rolled in the wind, carrying the sharp scent of salt and rain. Below, a man walked his golden retriever along the dunes, the dog leaping after gulls that wheeled and cried above the surf. The scene tugged at an old memory, Daniel at 5, his laughter bright as he chased seabirds across the sand, his arms spread wide like wings. He had been so full of joy, then so certain the world belonged to him. I prayed silently that somewhere, somehow, he might find that light again. But I no longer lived my days waiting for scraps of affection to return. The ache had softened, reshaped itself into something sturdier. I had raised him with love, but love cannot thrive in a place where it is unseen. To spend the rest of my life begging for acknowledgement would be to vanish piece by piece, and I had already chosen otherwise. The phone buzzed beside me. A message from Maya lit the screen. "You free to speak at the high school next Friday. The students would love to hear your story." I smiled, slipping on my glasses to read it again. They wanted my voice not erased, not forgotten, but present. I thought of the foundation growing of the shelter filled with women who once believed they had no chance. I thought of Maya's daughter calling me Gran with effortless certainty. I turned back inside, closing the balcony doors against the sea breeze. The house was quiet but not empty. For the first time in years, I felt seen not as an afterthought, but as the beginning of a story that was finally mine. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.